Alright, kings, gentlemen, everyone else, welcome to yet another exciting episode of Man Drives Through the Feral Neighborhood, and hopefully the Geiger counter will not be sounding off too fiercely. I believe I may have found ways to mitigate the interference, but today we're going to be talking about what I like to call Europe's southern frontier. That is right, fellas, we are going to talk about Mare Nostrum, our sea. Mare Nostrum is, of course, the old Roman name for, just saw a friend, Roman name for the Mediterranean Sea, the sea which is directly south of Europe. The Mediterranean Sea. Now, in oceanography, they use Mediterranean Sea as a category. It, includes also the Gulf of Mexico. But the Mediterranean Sea, when you say that, everyone knows what you're talking about. And of course, as we all know, this is a sea bounded on all sides by land, and it has two ways in, two natural ways in or out. That is the Straits of Bosphorus, which empties into the Black Sea, another Mediterranean Sea, traditionally considered not really a part of the Mediterranean because of, well, there's actually good reasons for that. And the Straits of Gibraltar. Yeah, I keep forgetting that it's actually Gibraltar in English, just like the Arabic. We call it Gibraltar in the Slavic languages. Anyways, and as I will repeat until I am blue in the face, the southern frontier of Europe is not the Mediterranean Sea, it is North Africa. And the reason is because the sea is actually not a barrier to transport. It's not a natural barrier to incoming transport. And if Europe is serious about securing its frontier to the south and to a certain degree to the southeast, it has to secure not only the Mediterranean northern shore, but the Mediterranean southern shore. Now, you may have noticed there's already some people living on the Mediterranean eastern and southern shores, and this is what we're going to be focusing on in this video. And so Europe has to find ways to compel these peoples in one way or another to actually comply with what it demands, with its demands for security. So the non-European states bounding the Mediterranean Sea on its eastern and southern shore are, starting from the east, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. And these states are have historically been, friendly or hostile to Europe. Some have pretensions to Europeanness, such as Israel and Turkey, but they are at best, fair weather friends, and at worst just outright, enemies of the continent. And all of these countries have to be dealt with. They have to be. We have to use a combination of diplomacy, diplomatic, and ultimately maybe even economic and military pressure in order to get them in line with European demands. What are European demands? First of all, the flow of migrants must stop. As many of you know, as many of you are, I would say, painfully aware, Europe has a migrant problem. We have an excess of people coming in from the south and to the east, seeking asylum or seeking economic opportunity or just seeking criminal opportunity in Europe. And that has to stop. That has to stop if our continent is to survive. So, and a lot of these people are also knocked loose by the warmongering activities of Russia and China in the Middle East and in Africa. So, for example, one of the reasons why the Wagner group did the thing they did in Niger, where they basically destabilized the government, was in the hope of just knocking loose Nigerians as refugees or economic opportunists to go north into Europe and generally destabilize Europe by pouring into the continent in huge numbers. And I just this morning I read something on Twitter about maybe the Russians are also doing similar things in Latin America to bother the Americans. I don't know. I need to reread the thing to make sure it's true, and not just people being a little paranoid. But it's very on brand for what the Russians do. So there's a way to actually stabilize the region. We should definitely look into stabilizing the region so shit like that doesn't happen. But a stopgap against that would be European either direct or proxy control of the Mediterranean shore. So let's go country by country. Good news, 2 countries we already have good enough relations with that we can that they will be willing and able to stop the migrant flows if we asked of them, and we already ask it of them. In certain respects, those countries would be Morocco under King Mohammed. Morocco's been under the same dynasty. It's a very stable North African state, not exactly super wealthy, but very politically stable, culturally rich. And as a general rule, the Moroccans want to be friends of Europe. They understand that making an enemy of Europe would be bad for Morocco. So I guess that's already done for us. And the second state would be Syria under al-Julani. Now, as I've said before, now that the Assad regime has been destroyed, what we're going to see is the fewer migrants moving towards Europe, and there's also the possibility that we might get some of the Middle Eastern gas pumping through Syria and into Europe. And since I made that was the second video on this channel, al-Julani has actually met with representatives of the German government, and he is currently negotiating the return of 700,000 Syrians from Germany to Syria. Now, I don't know how many exactly Syrians they have in Germany or in Europe as a general rule, but 700,000 fewer refugees, migrants, whatever you want to call them, that's definitely a good deal for us. And, well, what can I say? If only every other Arab leader was like al-Julani. Now, let's look at some of the more problematic ones. We have Algeria and you have Egypt. With Algeria, a big problem with Algeria is that their nation was born, you could say, in the conflagration with the French in the French colonial war against Algeria. And so a lot of what they are about is based on this anti-colonial resentment towards Europe, this hatred towards Europe, which I'm not going to go into whether it's justified or not. Let's just, say that the Algerians have a grudge against France specifically and Europe more generally. So we're going to have to use some very deft diplomacy to deal with the Algerians there. And also, it would be very good for us if they could get their asserted French diaspora under control. So French Algerians, it would be very good if some of them could be returned to the country, especially considering that all of the countries I'm talking about are in demographic crisis. They are, if they're not in demographic crisis right now, they're gonna be in demographic crisis within the next 20 years due to precipitously falling fertility rates among what we like to call the third world, and more generally against the races we traditionally call brown, and these are all Semitic Arab peoples. Yeah. Then you have Egypt. Egypt is a peculiar problem because Egypt does not live within its means. Egypt is a state. It has a population of somewhat under 100 million, or they may have crossed the 100 million population threshold some time ago, but they only really have the agricultural base to support around 50 million in population, even with intensive agriculture methods. And basically, Egypt is being paid to exist by the United States, and it's also paid to not chimp out and attack Israel by the United States. This is why when Donald Trump halted foreign aid, he halted foreign aid to all countries except Israel, Ukraine, and Egypt. Egypt is a big one because what's been the arrangement for the past 50 years, I believe, maybe more so, is the Americans pay Egypt and the Egyptians don't attack Israel, and it's cheaper than just Israel and Egypt having a war every 5 or so years for everyone involved. And of course, Egypt controls the Suez Canal. And so this is essentially an American client state. Now, I don't know if this continent has the resources to spare, but considering the possibility that America might become hostile to Europe, and in many ways it already is hostile to Europe, we should definitely look into the possibility of making Egypt our own client state, which would also allow us to secure the Suez Canal. Now, maybe it's not a good idea to actually take on Egypt's upkeep onto ourselves and just let the Americans off the hook. But fundamentally, someone's going to have to take, Egypt under its protection, or it's going to destabilize violently and start chimping out. And if it starts chimping out, no matter what direction it starts chimping out in, the Suez Canal is going to be closed. And unless we want to administrate that directly, we gotta prop up Egypt. Now, let's talk now about the really problematic three states. Those would be Lebanon, Libya, and Israel. All three states are more or less in a state of various levels of civil war. So you have Libya, which has just been a complete shit show, and the cure for Libya is, if we want to make sure that it is secure for Libya, it is secure for Europe, I think the best way we could do that is to just go into the country, stabilize it, build a government for it, and actually do it intelligently, not like the Americans did in Iraq, but actually give this government whatever it needs to stabilize the country and essentially recreate a sort of friendly Libyan state. We broke it. Actually, a lot of people will say Americans broke Libya, but it wasn't them. It was the French under Nicolas Sarkozy who led there, and the Americans under Obama followed. This was actually criticized at the time by American conservatives. Why are the French leading this stupid war to destabilize North African state? Why isn't it us doing it? It's just contrarianism. So I think that at this point, only just even the French and the Italians could just go in there, crack a couple of skulls, and establish a government of some sort. It would also check Russian and Turkish influence over Libya, and it would stabilize that part of the world. It will also help stabilize Tunisia, and coupled with a stabilization of Niger, if the French are up for it, we could actually start pumping some much-needed oil and gas in from Nigeria, because that's the route it's going to take, through Chad, through Niger, through Libya, and into Europe. Oh, actually, no, Chad is a little bit on the side, so it's going to have to go through Niger and through Libya and maybe Mali. There's Lebanon. Now, Lebanon is not in a state of open civil war, but it's been in a state of low-level civil war, or war with the Israelis since time immemorial. So that is going to have to be stabilized, physically or not, I don't know, through proxies or directly. Personally, that Lebanon and Israel sort of go together. If we are strong enough in Syria and the Syrians are good enough friends of ours, we could potentially go into Lebanon as a continent and actually lay down a couple of ground rules. And this would include giving Lebanon security guarantees against the Israelis, because every time Lebanon stabilizes a little bit, the Israelis start dicking around. And of course, the excuse is that there's Hezbollah over there, and Hezbollah is this, and Hezbollah and this, that. And fundamentally, now that Hezbollah is no longer such a big factor, you would think that maybe Lebanon could stabilize, but it's going to have to take a lot of work from Europe in both the diplomatic realm and possibly even military realm. And that leaves us with Israel and I guess Turkey, and these countries are militarily strong, and they're in some ways, well, I would say Turkey wants to be European, and Israel wanted to be European at some point, and at this point I think they've sort of embraced the reality of what they are, which is just another Middle Eastern tin pot dictatorship, and they're far more likely to caucus with the Americans. We cannot buy them like we could possibly buy the Egyptians, and we couldn't just slap them into sanity like we could with Libya or Lebanon, and you can't even string them along with the promise of one day becoming European like the Turks. So we're just probably going to have to live with Israel as a canker sore on the Mediterranean Sea. But then again, Israel is surrounded by enemies, so they would be advised to tread lightly, because my vision for Europe is a Europe which fully controls the shore of the Mediterranean, like the Romans before us. What coast does not know our blood? I don't remember the exact Latin phrase, But that is our frontier. That is the frontier of Europe. The eastern and southern shore of the Mediterranean, they will have to be stabilized if we're to stop the flow of migrants and ensure the flow of vital strategic resources for the continent. And this will also assuage some of the fears which the southern European allies have about their own security. And if the fears of the southern European allies, so Italy, Spain, France, Greece, are assuaged, well, we can actually start worrying about the real threat, which is always coming from the east, and maybe even treason from the west. But, you know, we can talk that some other time. This video is long enough. So, with that, I bid you adieu, and see you in the sunny Mediterranean.